going to go out and I'm going to do my thing and make my music, because I'm not going to run around out here and...
Country music may be all about heartbreak, whiskey, and pickup trucks, but behind the twang and rhinestones lies a world of backstabbing, lawsuits, and pure drama. From fiery love triangles to ego-fueled showdowns, these legends didn't just sing about trouble, they lived it. In this video, we're diving into the 21 biggest fights in old country music history. Number 21, George Jones and Tammy Wynette. At first glance, George Jones and Tammy Wynette looked like country music royalty, the king and queen of heartbreak ballads who had finally found love in each other. But behind the public image was a relationship filled with chaos, addiction, and explosive arguments that left both bruised emotionally and, at times, physically. They married in 1969, just as Tammy's star was rising and George was already a legend with a destructive drinking problem. For a while, fans adored their duets and saw them as the perfect match, two voices made for each other. George's alcoholism was uncontrollable. He'd disappear for days, show up late to shows, if at all, and lash out in drunken rages. Tammy, while tough and ambitious, grew tired of the emotional roller coaster. They fought constantly, and Jones's erratic behavior only worsened with time. There were rumors of domestic violence, police calls, and even stories about Jones riding a lawnmower to the liquor store when his car keys were taken away. In 1975, Tammy filed for divorce, but even that didn't end the drama. Their post-divorce years were just as intense, co-parenting a daughter, continuing to record together for commercial reasons, and constantly being asked about each other in interviews. Tammy once said George would destroy everything in his path, while George later admitted that losing her was one of the biggest regrets of his life. Years later, Tammy accused George of assaulting her, breaking her cheekbone, a claim he denied, but one that made headlines. Still, despite the bitterness, they reunited musically several times in the 1980s and 90s. Their chemistry was undeniable, and fans couldn't get enough of the tension they brought to the mic. Some even hoped they'd reconcile for good. They never did. Tammy passed away in 1998. George passed away in 2013, but even late in life, he spoke about Tammy with sadness and remorse. Number 20, Dolly Parton and Porter Wagoner. When Dolly Parton joined the Porter Wagoner Show in 1967, she was a fresh-faced young talent with a mountain voice and a dream. Porter Wagoner was already a country star and TV personality, known for his flashy suits and signature blonde pompadour. For over 7 years, Dolly was the featured girl singer on Wagoner's nationally syndicated TV show. He helped shape her early career, produced her music, and pushed her into the spotlight. But Dolly wasn't content to just be someone's sidekick. She had ambitions bigger than a duet act, and as her fame grew, so did Porter's need to control it. Dolly eventually decided to leave the show in 1974 to pursue her solo career, but Porter didn't take the news well. He was so upset, he filed a $3 million lawsuit against Dolly in 1979, accusing her of breaching their contract. The lawsuit dragged on for years until they finally settled out of court. Dolly later admitted that she gave Porter a significant sum of money just to keep the peace and move on with her life. Despite the legal and emotional blows, the two eventually reconciled. In the early T, Dolly even inducted Porter into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Number 19, Hank Williams Jr. and the Nashville Establishment. Hank Williams Jr. was born into country music royalty, but he was never content living in his father's shadow. In the early years of his career, Nashville producers dressed Hank Jr. in rhinestone suits and fed him songs that mimicked his father's classics. He sang Your Cheatin' Heart and Hey Good Lookin', almost like a tribute act. But as he grew older, Hank began pushing back. He hated the pressure, the control, and the idea that he had no creative freedom. By the early 1970s, he was drinking heavily, getting into fights, and spiraling emotionally. Then in 1975, everything changed. Hank Jr. nearly passed away in a mountain climbing accident in Montana. He fell over 500 feet and suffered a fractured skull, facial disfigurement, and multiple broken bones. Doctors weren't sure he'd survive, let alone sing again, but that near-death experience birthed a new man. When he returned to the music scene, he came back louder, rowdier, and fully outlaw. He grew a beard, put on sunglasses, and released albums like Family Tradition and Whiskey Bent and Hellbound. These weren't sweet Nashville ballads. They were gritty, rebellious, and unapologetically Hank, but Nashville still wasn't ready for him. He was too rock, too wild, and too politically vocal. Many traditionalists turned their backs on him, refusing to play his music or book him for shows. Hank didn't care. He built his own following and became a symbol of the outlaw country movement, alongside legends like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson. Number 18, Johnny Cash and Columbia Records. Johnny Cash was Columbia Records' golden boy for nearly 3 decades. However, Cash's sound had become less commercial by the early 1980s, and his chart presence faded. Though he was still a legend, Columbia didn't see him as profitable anymore. In 1986, after nearly 30 years of partnership, Columbia Records dropped Johnny Cash from their roster. Just like that, the Man in Black was without a label. It was a cold decision, and Johnny never forgot it. The breakup wasn't just business to him, it was deeply personal. Columbia didn't just let go of a fading artist, they let go of a living icon. And Johnny wasn't one to stay quiet about it. In 1987, Cash released Chicken in Black, a bizarre satirical song that mocked Columbia's decision and his own status as a has-been. It was his way of saying, "You want me to be ridiculous? Fine." He later admitted he hated the song but released it to make a point. He was done playing by their rules. The industry took notice. Many fans were shocked that Columbia would let such a legacy act go so easily. But the label was more focused on younger stars and changing trends. Country music was leaning toward a more polished, pop-influenced sound, and Johnny's gritty, outlaw style didn't fit the mold anymore. It wasn't until the early 1990s that Johnny found his true comeback. He signed with American Recordings, a smaller label run by producer Rick Rubin. Rubin let Johnny strip everything down, just him and a guitar. The result? A haunting, raw sound that reintroduced Johnny Cash to a new generation. Number 17, Waylon Jennings and the Nashville Sound. When Waylon first signed with RCA Records in the early 1960s, the label had total control. They told him what to record, chose the songs, brought in studio musicians, and produced his music with zero input from him. Back then, most country artists were treated like hired hands, not creators. Waylon hated it. He wanted to use his own band, the Wailers, and play real music, not factory-made hits. By the time the early 1970s rolled around, Waylon had enough. He was tired of being told what to do. In the year 1972, after years of arguing and pushing back, he finally forced RCA to renegotiate his contract. For the first time, he had full artistic control over his recordings, something unheard of in country music at the time. This freedom sparked a movement. In 1973, he released Honky Tonk Heroes, an album that felt raw, honest, and defiant. It wasn't just an album, it was a rebellion on vinyl. Then came Wanted, The Outlaws in 1976, a collaboration with Willie Nelson, Jesse Coulter, and Tom Paul Glazer. It went on to become the first country album in history to be certified platinum, meaning it sold over 1 million copies. Waylon's feud wasn't just a fight against sound, it was a fight for freedom. Number 16, Merle Haggard and Johnny Paycheck. Merle Haggard and Johnny Paycheck were both rough-edged, hard-living legends cut from the same cloth. They sang about prison, pain, and outlaw living because they lived it. But despite their shared roots, their friendship would crash and burn in one of country music's most unpredictable feuds, full of jealousy, egos, and almost violence. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Merle Haggard was at the top of his game. Johnny Paycheck, on the other hand, was still grinding his way up the ladder, having spent years as a backup singer and bass player, including for George Jones. By the mid-1970s, Paycheck finally broke through with his working-class anthem, "Take This Job and Shove It." It hit number 1 on the country charts in 1977 and made him a star. But while fans were cheering, some old friends were seething, Merle included. The tension started when Paycheck began boasting in interviews that he had helped inspire Merle's style. That rubbed Merle the wrong way. According to several insiders, Merle felt that Johnny was trying to take credit for his sound, and Merle wasn't having it. At one point during a backstage event in the early 1980s, the two came face to face and nearly came to blows. Security and mutual friends had to separate them. Their feud simmered through the decade, fueled by substances, booze, and egos. Johnny's legal troubles didn't help. In 1985, he shot a man in a bar in Ohio after an argument over a woman and was later sentenced to 7 years in prison. The irony? Years later, Merle quietly donated money to help Johnny cover some legal fees when Paycheck was struggling financially. Though they never reconciled publicly, that small gesture showed there was still a sliver of respect between two damaged legends. Number 15, Loretta Lynn and censorship boards. Loretta Lynn was never afraid to speak her mind. Born in a Kentucky coal mining town and married at the age of 15, she lived the life she sang about. But in the conservative world of 1960s and 1970s country music, Loretta's honesty ruffled feathers, especially with radio stations and censorship boards. Her songs tackled topics most female artists wouldn't touch. In 1972, she released The Pill, a bold anthem celebrating birth control and a woman's right to choose her own path. It was revolutionary, especially in the South, where family planning was still taboo. Over 60 radio stations banned the song, calling it offensive and immoral. But fans loved it. The controversy pushed the single into the top 5 on the country charts. That wasn't her only battle. Loretta's songs like Rated X, Don't Come Home a-Drinkin', With Lovin' on Your Mind, and Wings Upon Your Horns also faced backlash. Critics accused her of being too vulgar, too outspoken, or too political. The censorship didn't slow her down. It fueled her fire. She became a trailblazer for women in country music. Number 14, Conway Twitty and record labels. Before he was a country legend, Conway Twitty was a rock and roll star. In the late 1950s, he scored a #1 pop hit with It's Only Make Believe. But Conway's heart was always in country music, and that's where the war with record labels began. When he decided to switch to country in the early 1960s, record executives weren't having it. They didn't believe his fan base would follow, and they saw him as too rock for the Nashville crowd. Multiple labels told him no. One even suggested he change his name back to Harold Jenkins because Conway Twitty sounded too flashy for country. But Conway refused to back down. He took control of his music, produced his own sessions, and slowly made the transition on his terms. When he signed with MCA Records, he clashed with executives again, this time over content. They wanted radio-friendly love songs. Conway wanted storytelling, heartbreak, and edge. In the early 1970s, his song You've Never Been This Far Before stirred major controversy. Many radio stations banned it for being too suggestive. Label executives panicked, fearing backlash. But Conway stood firm, and the song became a #1 country hit anyway. Tired of constant battles, Conway eventually started his own label, Twitty Bird Records. This move gave him freedom, but also put him at odds with Nashville power players. Still, he never stopped. By the time the 1980s rolled around, Conway had more than 50 #1 country hits, one of the highest totals in history. Number 13, Kristofferson and music executives. Kristofferson came into country music like a storm, gritty, poetic, and completely unfiltered. Before music, Chris was a Rhodes Scholar and a U.S. Army captain. He gave it all up to chase songwriting in Nashville. He worked as a janitor at Columbia Studios just to be close to the action. In 1970, when Johnny Cash recorded his song Sunday Morning Comin' Down, Chris became a star overnight. But execs still weren't sold on him as a performer. They said he looked too rough, sang too flat, and needed to clean up if he wanted mainstream success. Chris refused. He didn't want to be a polished product. He wanted to be real. He kept writing deep, poetic songs like Help Me Make It Through the Night and Me and Bobby McGee, which other artists made into hits. In the mid-1970s, after several chart successes, Chris released Breakaway, a raw and emotional album that execs hated. They claimed it wasn't commercial enough and pressured him to abandon that sound. He pushed back, walking away from multiple label meetings and choosing acting gigs over compromising his music. Chris eventually found a home in outlaw country, teaming up with Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Johnny Cash to form the Highwaymen in the 1980s. Number 12, Willie Nelson and the IRS. In the early 1990s, Willie Nelson wasn't just feuding with another artist. He was in a full-blown war with the United States government. After years of poor financial management, shady accountants, and trusting the wrong people, Willie found himself in the crosshairs of the Internal Revenue Service. The damage? A staggering $16 million in unpaid taxes, interest, and penalties. In 1990, the IRS raided his Texas home, seizing everything from his ranch to his recording equipment and even family heirlooms. His properties were auctioned off, and Willie's name became front-page news, not for a hit song, but for owing the government more money than any country star had ever faced. Willie didn't hide. Instead, he got creative. He teamed up with his label to release the IRS tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories, an acoustic double album sold directly through late-night TV ads. Every dollar earned from the project went straight to the IRS, and fans showed up, buying the album in droves. Within a few years, Willie had paid off the bulk of the debt. Number 11, Reba McEntire and her own band. By the late 1980s, Reba McEntire was rising fast. She had already won multiple Country Music Association awards and was known for her powerhouse voice and stage presence. In 1987, Reba fired her entire band. The reason? She wanted a new sound, tighter control over her shows, and a more professional image as she crossed over into the country pop mainstream. The decision shocked fans and blindsided her musicians, some of whom had been with her since the beginning. Many of them took it personally, accusing her of turning her back on loyalty in favor of fame. Reba defended the move, saying it was purely business and necessary for her artistic growth. But the fallout was real. Friendships were strained, and the press labeled her as cold and cutthroat. Then came the tragedy that changed everything. In March of 1991, Reba's new touring band boarded a private jet after a concert in San Diego. The plane crashed into a mountain just 10 miles after takeoff, killing all 8 members of her band and her tour manager. Number 10, Charlie Rich and John Denver. The Country Music Association Awards in the year 1975 were meant to be a night of celebration, but one performer turned it into a blazing controversy. Charlie Rich had won CMA Male Vocalist of the Year in 1973. By 1975, he was at the top of his game and was invited to present the Entertainer of the Year award live on television. When he opened the envelope and saw that John Denver had won, Rich didn't smile or applaud. Instead, in front of millions of viewers, he pulled out a lighter and set the announcement card on fire. The audience gasped. The moment instantly became one of the most shocking live TV moments in country music history. Many believed Rich was mocking Denver, a softer, pop-leaning artist whose folk sound had always rubbed country purists the wrong way. Others said Rich was drunk or high. He was reportedly taking pain medication and drinking heavily at the time. Number 9, Tanya Tucker and Nashville Critics. Tanya Tucker came into the country music scene in the year 1972 at just 13 years old with her hit Delta Dawn. She had a raspy, mature voice far beyond her years, and it made waves. But as Tanya grew into her fame, she also became one of the most criticized women in country music. By her late teens, Tanya was already living like a rock star, smoking, drinking, and dating older men. Her relationship with Glenn Campbell, 22 years her senior, became headline news in the early 1980s. Nashville critics and traditionalists were outraged. They called her wild, inappropriate, and accused her of tarnishing the image of wholesome country women. Instead of softening, Tanya leaned into it. She wore bold outfits, posed for provocative magazine shoots, and wrote songs with fire and grit. But the more fearless she became, the more backlash she faced. Some radio stations refused to play her music, and critics painted her as a cautionary tale, talent wasted by rebellion. Number 8, Glenn Campbell and Tanya Tucker. In the early 1980s, Glenn Campbell and Tanya Tucker were one of the most talked about couples in country music, but for all the wrong reasons. Glenn, in his mid-40s, was already a legend with crossover hits like Rhinestone Cowboy and Wichita Lineman. Tanya, barely 20, was a rising star with a rebellious streak. Together, they were explosive. Their relationship began in the year 1980, and almost immediately, it was surrounded by scandal. Fans were shocked by the 22-year age gap. But what made headlines wasn't just the age difference. It was the fights, substances, and public meltdowns. Both were battling addictions at the time. Glenn to cocaine and alcohol, Tanya to the fast-paced lifestyle she'd grown up in. The tabloids covered every detail of their stormy love affair, the broken engagement, the screaming matches, even the physical altercations. Tanya once said in an interview that Glenn hit her more than once, while Glenn accused Tanya of being violent and unstable. In the year 1981, it all came to a head. Their relationship ended in a blaze of bitterness. Tanya poured her pain into songs like Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone, while Glenn tried to move on with his image intact. For years, neither held back when asked about the other. Tanya described Glenn as her first real heartbreak, while Glenn labeled the relationship a toxic mistake. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a public implosion. Number 7, Naomi and Winona Judd. The Judds were country music's golden mother-daughter duo in the 1980s. Naomi Judd, the glamorous and strong-willed matriarch, and Winona Judd, the powerhouse vocalist, took the genre by storm with hits like Grandpa, Tell Me About the Good Old Days, and Mama, He's Crazy. But behind their chart-topping success was a complicated relationship filled with tension, power struggles, and deep emotional wounds. From the start, Naomi was not just Winona's mother. She was her manager, stylist, and creative director. Winona, barely 20 when they rose to fame, often felt stifled. As she grew into her own voice and identity, she clashed with Naomi over nearly everything, from business decisions to stage presence. The tension boiled over in the year 1991 when Naomi announced her retirement due to a chronic illness, hepatitis C. Winona continued on as a solo artist, but the emotional distance between them only grew. Over the years, they reunited for tours, but interviews and documentaries revealed the truth. They fought constantly. Winona once admitted, "We love each other and we drive each other crazy. We're like oil and water." Naomi often tried to take credit for their success, which left Winona feeling overshadowed and unappreciated. In the year 2022, Naomi tragically passed away by unaliving just one day before the Judds were set to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Number 6, Patsy Cline and Kitty Wells. In the golden age of country music, few women stood taller than Kitty Wells and Patsy Cline. Kitty Wells earned the title of the Queen of Country Music after her breakthrough hit It Wasn't God Who Made Honky Tonk Angels in the year 1952, becoming the first female country artist to top the charts. A decade later, Patsy Cline rose with her emotional ballads and crossover appeal, challenging everything traditional country stood for. Though they never exchanged blows in the press or on stage, their rivalry simmered beneath the surface, and it wasn't hard to see why. Kitty was quiet, conservative, and deeply rooted in the gospel-tinged old-school country tradition. Patsy, on the other hand, was bold, sassy, and determined to change the image of women in the genre. She wore glamorous outfits, smoked, spoke her mind, and didn't hold back in interviews. She pushed for better pay, demanded respect from male executives, and walked into every room like she owned it. Their tension was more cultural than personal. Kitty reportedly didn't care for Patsy's outspoken nature and thought she strayed too far from country's core values. Patsy, meanwhile, found the industry too slow to evolve and often felt frustrated by the lack of support from established stars like Kitty. When Patsy tragically passed away in a plane crash in the year 1963, she was just 30 years old. Kitty, always gracious in public, paid her respects, but the contrast between them remained a defining image in country music. Their feud wasn't loud, but it reflected a deeper struggle: old versus new, tradition versus transformation, silence versus voice. And in the end, both women carved legacies that shaped the path for every female country artist who came after. Number 5, Buck Owens and Dawn Rich's estate. Buck Owens and Dawn Rich were inseparable in the world of country music. In the 1960s, their tight harmonies and twangy Bakersfield sound redefined what country could be. Dawn was Buck's right-hand man, his bandleader, lead guitarist, and musical soulmate. Together, they turned hits like Act Naturally and Love's Gonna Live Here into gold. But when Dawn tragically passed away in a motorcycle accident in the year 1974, everything changed. Buck was devastated. He later said Dawn's death was the saddest day of my life. But as years passed, Dawn's family and estate started raising questions, mainly about royalties, songwriting credits, and whether Dawn's contributions had been fairly honored. Quiet murmurs in the industry suggested that Buck had downplayed just how much of the Buckaroo's sound was Dawn's genius. Tensions reportedly grew over archival releases and credits on compilation albums. Dawn's estate felt his legacy was being overshadowed, and Buck was accused of not doing enough to protect or promote his former partner's memory. Though no public lawsuit ever emerged, music historians and fans often debated whether Buck gave Dawn the recognition he truly deserved. Number 4, Johnny Paycheck and Everybody. Johnny Paycheck didn't just have one feud, he had dozens. Known for his gritty vocals and hard-living ways, Johnny spent most of his career at war with someone: promoters, fellow artists, label execs, and even fans. If there was a line, Johnny crossed it. Born Donald Eugene Lytle, he started as a sideman for stars like George Jones, but by the 1970s, he was headlining his own shows and dropping hits like Take This Job and Shove It. That anthem made him a hero to the working class and a nightmare to authority figures everywhere. Johnny had a fiery temper. He once got into a fistfight with Merle Haggard, clashed repeatedly with Waylon Jennings, and was banned from multiple venues for trashing dressing rooms and showing up drunk, or not at all. His wildest moment came in the year 1985 when he shot a man in an Ohio bar after a drunken argument over a woman. The bullet grazed the man's head. Paycheck was sentenced to 7 years in prison but served only 22 months, thanks to a pardon from Ohio Governor Richard Celeste in the year 1990. Even while incarcerated, he never lost his outlaw status, writing songs behind bars and refusing to apologize for his behavior. Many in the industry tried to help him, including George Jones, who bailed him out more than once, but Johnny often burned bridges faster than he could build them. Number 3, Marty Robbins and Ralph Emory. Their tension started in the 1960s when Robbins felt that Emory was dismissive during an on-air interview. According to Marty, Ralph talked down to him and made sarcastic comments about his music. The exchange left Robbins fuming, and from then on, he avoided Emory's shows whenever possible. It didn't end there. In several later interviews, Robbins accused Emory of playing favorites and using his media power to shape public opinion unfairly. Robbins was known for calling people out, directly and without filter, and Ralph was no exception. He believed Emory promoted certain artists while ignoring or sidelining others, including himself. Ralph, for his part, later admitted in his autobiography that Robbins was difficult, but also one of the most talented men I ever met. Still, the bad blood never cooled. Even when both men were asked to appear together at events or tributes, Robbins would decline if Emory was involved. Number 2. David Allan Coe and Everyone. Coe rose to fame in the mid-1970s with hits like You Never Even Called Me By My Name and The Ride, but his underground albums, especially Nothing Sacred and Underground album, sparked outrage. They contained explicit lyrics and offensive jokes that many considered racist, misogynistic, and downright vulgar. Major record stores refused to carry them, and radio stations blacklisted him. Artists distanced themselves too. Steve Earle once called him a racist and a misogynist. When asked about that comment, Coe fired back with a diss track. He also clashed with Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, fellow outlaws who felt he took the rebellious image too far. Coe also claimed to have written songs that became hits for other stars, like Take This Job and Shove It. But Johnny Paycheck got the credit, and Coe never stopped reminding people of that. Number 1. Dwight Yoakam and Buck Owens. At first, Owens saw Yoakam as a copycat, not a protege. He felt Dwight was riding his wave without showing proper respect. In interviews, Buck threw subtle shade, calling the new sound familiar and a little too close for comfort. Word spread fast in country circles. Buck didn't approve of Dwight. Dwight, always sharp-tongued and fiercely independent, responded in his own way. He kept winning. His albums Guitars, Cadillacs, etc., and Hillbilly Deluxe were hits. He revived interest in the old-school honky-tonk style Buck had pioneered. Eventually, even Buck couldn't ignore the influence. By the early 1990s, the two stars connected behind the scenes. Dwight extended an olive branch and asked Buck to collaborate. Buck agreed, and in the year 1996, they recorded Streets of Bakersfield, which became a #1 hit and introduced Owens to an entirely new generation of fans. So, what do you think about these country music singers? Do you think the feud was worth it? Let's hear from you in the comments. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.